We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 40a. On the previous Amud, Rava said that Rav Nachman said that a macha, a protest, is in front of two people. V'ein tzarich lomar kasovu. The person does not need to say write it down, meaning it can be assumed that he wants to write down the protest that he is making regarding a piece of property. And the Gemara continues, Moda bifnei shnaim. If a person makes a moda is when a person is letting it be known that whatever he's doing is being coerced. Let's say he's giving a certain property, but he's saying that it's being coerced. He doesn't really want it to be a kinyan. So when he makes that known, he does that in front of two people. V'ein tzarich lomar ksovu. And again, he doesn't need to say write it down. We automatically assume that he would want to write that down. And we'll take a look at the Rashbam. V'chein moda bifnei shnaim. A moda as well as in front of two people. Misha ansuhu limchor, meaning they're forcing the person to sell something. V'liten es shalo bal karchu. He's giving what is his, but he's doing it against his will. V'lichtov shtar mechiro matana. And he's writing this shtar mechira document of sale, or a shtar matana document to give it, bifnei eidim, in front of witnesses. So tzarich lodia kodem lachen. He needs to make it known before that, l'shnei eidim, to two eidim, that he's being coerced. V'lomer, and to say, du'u lachem shemechira zu matana shel sada zu. You should know that this sale or this gift of this field, shani rotza lasos leploni shelo b'rtzon nafshi. Yes, I'm doing it, but I'm not doing it willingly. Because essentially, I'm being forced. And so in this case, and also in the case of a protest, you don't need to say ksovu. And the Rashbam explains, Ve'ein tzarich lomar ksovu shtar moda. You don't need to say write down the shtar moda. We assume and we write down for the person. Why is it that in both of these cases we just write it down without asking? He doesn't need to give an instruction. Klala demil. So the Rashbam says the general rule is kol midi dezechusulo. Anything that is good, that's beneficial for him. Ein ha'edim tzrichim litol heimenu rishus. The witnesses don't need to get permission from him. It's just assumed, essentially working with the rule of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. We do something that's of a benefit to somebody, even not in front of him. And so that's why, again, by both of the case of macha and moda, it's ve'in tzarich lomar ksovu. He doesn't need to give the instruction to write it down. Now, hoda, let's say a person is admitting that he owes something. Bifnei shnaim, that's also in front of two people, but in that case, that's already not a benefit to him, that's a detriment. V'tzarech lomar kasovu, so he does need to say write it down in order for them to write it down. And kinyan bifnei shnaim, let's say a person is doing a kinyan, ve'eno, that's also in front of two people, v'eno tzarech lomar kasovu, over there he does not need to say write it down. And the Rashbam explains, hoda bifnei beis, again, admission is in front of two people, adam shemoda lechaveru bifnei beis, shechayev lomana, a person's admitting to his friend in front of two people that he owes him a money, tzarech lomar. He's got to say, write it down. Sheyetzavim halove lichtov lo shtar lamal v'le'edus, that the borrower is giving the instruction to write a document for the lender, and that will be as a proof to chol shash yirtze ligvos chovo yotzi shtaru alalove, that any time he wants to collect this debt, he'll be able to take out this shtar against the borrower. Avol shelo b'rishos love, but if he doesn't have permission, if we don't have permission from the love, ein kosim, we don't write that shtar dechovulo, because this is not something that's a benefit to him. This is a chovulo. This is an obligation that he has, and therefore he needs to say, he needs to give the instruction to write it, otherwise we do not. And then we have the case of kinyan, means to say as follows, kinyan sudar, I'll call davar bifnei beis. He's doing a kinyan sudar, which essentially he's using some kind of scarf, some type of vessel to give something over. That's in front of two people. V'lo b'itz lasa, three people are not needed. Umishum degabe kiyim shtaro samar gimel, we'll see in a moment that by certification of a shtar you do need three people. So hutzrach lafarish b'chol hani dedai b'shnayim, so we need to explain by all of these cases that it's sufficient with two people. And the Rashbam continues, Ve'ein tzarech lomar ksovu, in this case of kinyan, he does not need to give the instruction to write it down. The reason for this is going to be explained as we go on. And finally, the Gemara says, V'kiyim shtaros b'shlosha, when it comes to certification of shtaros, that's talking about a situation of certifying a shtar to make sure it was not forged, that is done in front of three people. And the Rashbam explains, Kiyim shtaros b'gimel misha yeshlo shtar al chaveiro, somebody has a document against his friend. V'choshe shem yilchu edim lemedinas hayam o yamusu, he's afraid that the Edom, the witnesses signed, maybe they'll travel far away or they'll die. Or he's afraid that when he comes to collect the debt, so the lova is going to claim it was already paid off or it was forged. He's going to need to certify those signatures. He won't find people to certify. So Kate said, so what should he do? So he goes to Bezin, he goes to the court, he brings the witnesses that sign themselves. chasimas yadein b'fnei bezin. They testify about their signatures in the court. V'hem kosum b'sof hashtar lamata mechasimas ha'edim, and they write at the bottom of the shtar, beneath the signatures, b'mos of tlasuk echada havina v'nafak shtar da kadamna v'yasu ploni uploni v'yasidu ha'chasimas yadayu v'shrenui v'kaimenui kedechazi. The bezin essentially writes, we have certified these signatures. V'chosmin bo gimel hadayonim, the three judges, they sign it. V'hu henpik, and that is called what we refer to as a henpik. And so again, that's the idea of kiyum shtaris. You write a certification of a shtar, and that the Gemara is saying it needs three people. And the Gemara continues now and analyzes the case of kinyan. Again, that was kinyan sudar, which is in front of two people, and you don't need to say kesovu. He doesn't need to instruct them to write it. Amar Rava says, he kashali ha kashali. If I have a difficulty, this is difficult. Hai kinyan hechi dami. When we're talking here about a kinyan sudar, that you're doing this kind of kinyan, giving something over, what exactly is the case? Ikamaisa bezdin dami. If we're viewing this like a maisa bezdin, meaning like an action of the court, li boitz loss, it should require three people. And iloka maisa bezdin dami. And if it's not considered like an action of the court, so amai eino tzarach lomar kesovu. So then why doesn't he need to say write it down? He should need to give the instruction, because in this case he's obligating himself. All cases of obligation, he should need to give the instruction to write it down, unless we're going to say that it's considered like an action of the court. So then if that's the case, it's considered like an action of the court, it should need three people. So that's why Rav is bothered by the case of kinyan. And the Gemara says, Basra de boy hadar pashta. After he asked the question, he answered the question and explained as follows: Liolam lav kemaisa bezin dami. Really, kinyan is not considered like an action of the court. And over here, what's the reason why he doesn't need to give the instruction to write it down? Mishum destam kinyan l'chsiva omed. Because in general, when you're doing a kinyan, the understanding is in general that it should be written down. And the Rashbam explains, Amar Rava, Kashali, Rava says, if I have any difficulty, b'chol hanachdinim, meaning with all of these laws, Diyamarli Rav Nachman, which Rav Nachman told me, Gabe kinyan l'chud hu dekashli. It's only one of the laws that's difficult. That's the one by kinyan. Hai kinyan l'may medami le Rav Nachman. What's Rav Nachman considering kinyan similar to? Ikamaisa bezdin dami, if he's considering it like a maisa bezdin, like an action of the court, umishum de dom ledin shel dayonin shemotzi mizev enosim lazen. Since he's considering it similar to that, a case in the court with judges where you're taking from one party and giving it to the other. V'af eidei kinyan al yedei eduson sharowan bekinyan yotzei mamon zeh b'shas kinyan miyad hamakna liyad hakona. Again, even through these witnesses, that's what's happening. It's a transfer of the money. Umishum de domi lemaisa bezin kamar of Nachman ein sarach lamer kasofu. And because it's like a maisa bezin, it's like an action of the court. That's why Rav Nachman says he doesn't need to give the instruction to write it down. Al ma'afa gav dechov hu lemakna lichtov shtar liyafos zuchusa shalkona. Meaning, even though it's really an obligation to the makna because he's losing over here, and we're essentially benefiting the kona here by writing the shtar. Nevertheless, the witnesses do write that down below reshus, so even without his permission. Kedin kol ma'isa bezin. That's true by all ma'isa bezin, by all actions of the court. Shekoach bezin yofev hefker and hefker, because the court has a lot of strength. They can make something ownerless if they want. Lichtov kol anasib if name. They can write anything that's done before them. They can write it down. V'yim kainli boy gimel kikiyim shtaros. But if he's considering it like a ma'isa bezin, so it should be like certification of shtaros, which requires three people. V'lav k'maisa bezin. I mean, if it's not like a maisa bezin, umishamachi kamar desaki v'beis, that's why it's enough with two. Amayin otzarach lomer kasovu. Why doesn't he need to write kasovu? V'alo chov lo lichto below reshuso. It's a situation of obligation. You need to have the person's permission. And the Rashbam continues, liolam lav k'maisa bezin. So the Gemara then said, really, it's not like an action of the court. To havadai sadusa bialmu. It's just mere testimony. Umishamachi sagi v'beis. That's why it's enough with two people. And the Rashbam continues, the reason why he doesn't need to say kasovu, the Gemara said, is destam kinyan l'chsiva omed, because in general a kinyan is meant to be written, meaning mishum de'ein la'acher kinyan klum. After the kinyan, there's nothing after that. The kaven de makna le besudar b'fneidim. Once he's doing the kinyan sudar in front of witnesses, umemaher lahakanoso miyad, and he's quickly making this kinyan ve'ino madcheyu ad sheyelech v'yimshach b'metaltal. And the point is that the person giving over, he's not trying to delay anything and saying you need to make a kinyan, you need to do a mashicha on the items, or yelech v'yachzik b'karkos, or you need to go and make a chazak on the land. So since he's doing a kinyan sudar already, miskavin hu lahakanoso be'in yafi, you see that he wants to give it over generously right away. Umistama rotze sheyichtavu lo. So mistama, he does want to write it down, and that's why in this situation he does not need to say kesovu. And the Gemara continues, Rabba v'Rav Yosef da'armi tarvayu. Rabba and Rav Yosef, they both say lo kasvinon moda ela aman de lo tzayis dinah. We only write a moda if you're dealing with somebody who in general does not listen to the courts. But the Gemara continues, Abaye v'Rava da'armi tarvayu. Abaye and Rava, in contrast, they both say afilu alai v'alach, even for me and you, meaning even for people who do listen to the court, we write a modah. And the Gemara continues, Amri Nahardoi, they say in Nahardoi, Kol modah, any modah. And the Rashbam explains, according to Rabban Rav Yosef, again, the Gemara said, we only write a modah, aman de lotzayis dinner, for somebody who doesn't listen to the court. Meaning, sarvan bedin, he refuses to go to the court, itzayis dinner. The point over here is as follows. If the other party listens to the court, so lei malei, so he should say to him, lo honest, you weren't forced over here. Again, the idea of modah is you're declaring that you're being forced in a particular kinyan. But if the other party listens to the court, so then let's just say that you weren't forced. Because if he really was forcing you, you should have brought him to the court. There's no point of writing a modah if you could just bring this person to court if he listens to the court. But then the other opinion, Abai and Rava, they both say, Afilu alai v'alecha, we can even write a modah for me and you, meaning even for people who do listen to the court. There's an idea of writing a modah, and what's the reason? Meaning even though we listen to the court, Roy lichtov aleinu modah, it is fit to write for us a modah, to zimnin de'in bezin mezumin miyad, because sometimes the bezin is not available right away, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amid Beis.